that's just a little ballad style improvisation exercise that I'm going to teach you a bit later in this tutorial. I'm going to teach you it because I want to use it to show you a really cool but pretty straightforward little trick that you can use to create kind of, those rich and interesting chord sounds on the piano, and those rich melodic sounds as well, even if you don't know a ton of stuff about piano chords or music theory. You'll find this useful if you're interested in learning more about piano chords or about improvisation or songwriting, or if you just like to kind of sit down like that at the piano and kind of noodle around and make a cool sound. The basic technique that I'm going to talk about works in any key with a huge number of chords and different chord progressions and so on, but I'm going to demonstrate it with that improvisation exercise, which is in the key of E flat major. It just uses 5 chords, which sounds a lot, but they're all dead simple, and we're mostly going to be playing them, as you probably saw, in the left hand. Let me just talk you through them. Here's middle C. We've got E flat, F minor, G minor, A flat, and every now and then we're just going to be using a B flat, okay? That didn't crop up when I was playing just now, but every now and then we will use a B flat. So those chords once again are E flat, F minor, G minor, A flat, and the occasional B flat. Now the great thing about this exercise is that there isn't a set chord progression. You can take it very free and easy, and you don't have to worry much about where you are with which chord and that sort of thing. For the purposes of demonstrating it though, what I'm mostly going to be doing is moving, as I was when I played earlier, from E flat up to A flat, using the 2 minor chords as stepping stones, like this. E flat, F minor, G minor, A flat, then straight back down to E flat. Obviously we'll be doing it a bit slower than that, but that is the basic idea. Every now and then, when we feel like it, we can just pop up to B flat and come back down via the A flat to the E flat, the tonic, the home chord of E flat major. You'll see exactly what I mean when I demonstrate the exercise in a second. Now in the right hand, we're just going to be playing one chord, E flat. Look at the inversion that I'm using, the chord shape just there. Rather than the root position, which is there, I'm starting on this G, the one above middle C. I'm playing B flat and E flat, and often I'll be using the G above as well for a 4-note chord. Now that's still an E flat chord, exactly the same notes as the basic E flat triad, but just in a different order. Now you might be saying, well, hold on Bill, how does this work? We're playing one chord in this hand against different chords in the left hand. Surely we're going to get a clash, we're going to get a horrible mess. Well, as you heard at the beginning, no we're not necessarily. And that's the kind of secret, if you like, that lies at the heart of this technique. We're going to be using a single chord, or rather playing around with the notes of a single chord in the right hand, while changing chords in the left hand, and using the tension, the clash between those chords to create a richer and a deeper musical effect. Let me show you what I mean by playing through again. You'll see what I'm doing here is improvising a bit using rhythm. I'll do it in quite a simple way here, and I'm playing no more notes than the ones that I've shown you in the chord. So all the improvisation comes from playing around with the rhythm I use and from breaking up the chords, especially in the right hand. Okay, in other words, taking that basic E flat major chord to pieces and playing around with its constituent notes. Okay, here we go. So did you see what I was doing there? I was just using that E flat chord shape in the right against those changing chords in the left to create some kind of, much richer and more complex sounds from those basic chords. As I say, just by exploiting the harmonic clash between the two hands, or the apparent harmonic clash between those two hands. So when we started the exercise, let's just dig into that. When we started the exercise, both hands were playing an E flat chord. But then we changed chords for our first chord change, and suddenly we had an F minor chord in the left against that E flat chord in the right. What we essentially did there was actually to create a more complex F minor chord. If you were writing a chord chart, you could write that down as F minor 11, which is what it basically is, yeah? Then we moved up to G minor in the left against the E flat, which you could kind of write down as G minor with an added minor sixth, yeah, or even E flat major 7 with a G in the bass, if you wanted to get kind of really exotic. But there are a few ways you could notate it. Then the A flat, which I guess becomes an A flat major 9, and then the B flat is a B flat 6 with an added fourth. But it doesn't matter if you don't know those chord names, at least for now. The important thing is that you can create the sound. Sometimes you'll look at chord progressions for other people's songs on the internet, and you will see like an F minor 11 chord and think, wow, what kind of music theory genius does it take to think up something like that and include it in a song? What in fact has probably happened is that the songwriter's just been doing what we were doing there, noodling around on the piano keyboard, going through this kind of process, and suddenly hit on that chord and said, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Now, what is it called? Oh yeah, and this is where the music theory knowledge comes in. It's F minor 11. So it's really, really handy to learn the music theory, to be able to write it down and to kind of study it and develop it. But the most important thing is to be able to create the sound in the first place. So the main idea that we're playing around with here is that we're creating complexity from simplicity. We're taking these really quite basic underlying chords and sticking them together on the piano keyboard to see how they sound. We're not moving around loads, we're not deep diving into very abstract theory, we're just sticking to that simple E flat chord shape in the right and changing in the left. This is a really important point about doing stuff on the piano and about music in general. Although, an awful lot of musicianship is hard and takes practice, you can do some really cool stuff. You can create some great music using pretty basic ingredients. Like I said, complexity from simplicity. I should say at this point, by the way, that if you do want to dig deeper into this stuff, do please subscribe to my channel. Right now I've got kind of around 170, I think, piano tutorials on YouTube. Just hit one of the subscribe buttons. Maybe you may see one bottom right of the video or underneath the video, depending whether you're on desktop or mobile. And then YouTube will give you regular updates on my stuff and recommendations on the tutorials that are best for you. I've got some great playlists and stuff for beginners that you might be interested in. Let's just try that improvisation again, but this time let's make it a bit richer and more complex. What I'm going to do this time in the right hand is move a little bit outside the chord every now and then. So rather than just using the notes of the straight E flat chord, every now and then I'm going to drop in the note F here, which is part of the E flat major scale, but it gives us a few options when it comes to offering a little bit of interest and variety. I might also be a little bit more adventurous in my left hand too. Yeah, let's just kind of play around and see what comes out. I did a few interesting bits and pieces in the left there. I think a couple of times I missed the middle note out of some of the triads, yeah, to give them a kind of more open and ambiguous sound. And I dropped in, I think at one stage, the E flat on the F minor chord to suggest something more like an F minor 7 in the left. You know, just adding little bits of richness and complexity. I think I dropped down to the E flat there using my second over my thumb. All just kind of playing around, seeing how it develops under my fingers. So take it away for yourself and play around with it. Go and sit at the piano and fiddle around with this stuff. Remember that you don't really need to play a rigid chord progression. Yeah, don't focus on the chord progression. Just generally move from the E flat to the A flat via those minor chords. And every now and then drop in that little B flat and A flat descending. Okay, if you want to, it doesn't matter if you don't. You can just stick to the basic chords, or use a different chord progression altogether. Play around, see how you get on. You'll probably find that this kind of clashing chord techniques works best when you use the diatonic chords of a key. In other words, the chords that develop naturally from the scale of the key. Okay. But don't get too hung up on rules. As I say, if you want to kind of understand more of the theory, if all that talk of diatonic chords doesn't make sense to you, go and check out some of the other videos on my channel. When you're figuring out stuff like this on the piano, it's always best to go from the practical to the theoretical rather than the other way around. In other words, discover something new while you're actually live playing on the piano keyboard, or maybe by copying or listening to somebody else. Then use the theory you know to describe and understand and repeat what you've done, rather than starting with the theory and saying, oh, you know, the theory says I have to do this and then I have to do that, and oh dear, it's all so complicated. Yeah, always start on the piano. Just before you go and try it, let me just show you a couple of other things that I was doing there, just that will help you make a nicer sound. First of all, I wasn't worrying too much about fingering. Rather, I was using the sustain pedal to kind of stick things together and get that smooth legato sound. That's the right pedal, and it helped me sustain the notes. The safest advice when you're using the sustain pedal is to pedal on every chord change. Okay, so play around with your piano to see how it responds, but if you lift and then fairly quickly depress this pedal in a smooth movement, I'm exaggerating it there, just as your fingers land on a new chord, then that should do the job. Secondly, and this is critical, I was making in both of those improvisations, I was making a pretty big effort to be musical. Now that might sound kind of mad. Of course I was being musical, you know, I was playing the piano, but as I've said in other tutorials, as pianists, musicality is something that we have to be careful not to lose sight of. Because the piano makes the sound for us, yeah, it's very hung up, very easy for us to get kind of hung up on pressing the right keys at the right time and not actually listen to the sound that we're making. The point of music is to be expressive, to convey a feeling, an emotion, so make sure you are being musical, you are doing that when you play. Vary the louds and softs, the intensity, the tempo, whatever. Give your music some meaning, whatever it is you're playing. So that's about it. As I said, if you're new to my stuff, do please subscribe. And if you've enjoyed this, I've got loads and loads of other tutorials and playlists on chords and improvisation and such like that you will find useful. If you have a question, stick it in the comments thread underneath. I always do try to reply, although sometimes it takes a little while. And finally, do also, I should say, check out my books, How to Really Play the Piano. Which, if you can read little piano music, you don't have to be great, but if you can, you just need to be able to read a little, then it will get you started with chords and improvisation and all that kind of stuff about pop chords and jazz chords and things that you probably won't have learnt if you have regular piano lessons. Then there's my new collection of piano pieces, 7 Studies in Pop Piano, which is pretty much what it says, 7 short pieces of piano music from easy to intermediate, designed to get you playing in pop piano styles and ballad styles a little bit like the one we've been messing around at today, you know, like kind of Ben Folds or John or Regina Spektor or all of those guys. And each study comes with a bunch of notes to explain the theory behind practice, the harmony, how everything's working. Click on the links immediately below the video to find out about either book, or if you click the little info box to the top right hand corner, yeah, that'll take you to How to Really Play the Piano specifically. So there we go, there's more stuff coming up on the channel later this month, including the latest instalments in my Piano for Absolute Beginners series and my Jazz Piano for Beginners series. I'll see you soon.